Earth had always been a place of peace, its inhabitants unaware of the looming threat from the stars. But everything changed the moment the Ziran Empire decided to make their move. The Empire, a vast and terrifying force ruled by a cold, calculating AI, had been watching Earth for years. They were intrigued by humanity's potential, but more than that, they saw Earth as a prize to be taken, a planet filled with resources and strategic importance. In the dimly lit command room deep beneath the Earth's surface, the last line of defense was being prepared. The air was thick with tension as human commanders exchanged grim looks. On the surface, the world was already in chaos. Massive Ziran fleets loomed in the distance, their weapons ready to strike. But beneath it all, the humans had one final trump card, a secret weapon hidden in plain sight. The Echo. The Echo was a cloaked space station, a forgotten relic from an earlier age of human exploration. Its technology was far beyond what the Zirans could imagine, an advanced cloaking device that could make the station invisible to even the most sophisticated scanning systems. But even the Echo wasn't enough to win the war alone. To make the attack work, the humans needed to risk everything. And they needed to do it now. Captain Sarah Kale, the leader of the Resistance's most elite squad, stood in front of the war room's massive holographic map. She gazed at the flashing red dots representing the incoming Ziran fleet. "This is it," she muttered to herself, as the weight of the mission settled on her shoulders. She had led countless operations in her life, but this was different. There was no room for error. Failure meant the end of humanity. Beside her stood Jason Bonner, the team's hacker and tech genius. His sharp eyes flickered across the glowing screens in front of him, each one displaying vital data. "We have one shot at this," he said, his voice calm, though the anxiety was evident in his clenched jaw. "If we don't succeed, Earth won't survive." Bonner had been working tirelessly for days, cracking into the Ziran AI systems, looking for a vulnerability. He had found one, but exploiting it would require a team brave enough to take on the enemy's flagship. The Zirans had the advantage of technology, but humans had something else: creativity, willpower, and an ability to improvise. The mission was set, but not everyone was ready to accept the harsh truth. Earth's defenses were nearly gone. The last remnants of humanity's military were holding out in scattered bunkers, and their remaining weapons were outdated compared to the Zirans' advanced tech. Only a handful of soldiers, led by Kel, would stand a chance against the overwhelming alien force. In the dark corridors of the underground base, soldiers prepared for battle. Most had families back in the shelters, but there was no time to think of them now. Every man and woman knew their role: fight to survive or die trying. The weight of sacrifice loomed heavy in their hearts. They weren't just fighting for survival, they were fighting for the future of Earth. Kale and Bonner gathered their team, which consisted of only 5 of the best soldiers and engineers available. They knew the odds were stacked against them, but they had no other choice. Their mission: infiltrate the Ziran flagship, upload Bonner's AI virus to cripple their systems, and escape before the entire fleet came crashing down on them. It was a suicide mission, but one that had to be done. The squad, led by Kale, geared up. Their faces were determined, but fear flickered in their eyes. They knew that no one might make it back. As they suited up in their heavy combat armor, there was a moment of silence. They all understood the risks. For some, this would be their last battle. For others, it would be the first of many. Outside, the Ziran fleet moved closer, its warships blocking out the sun. The alien ships were sleek, dark, and imposing, their designs made to instill fear in any who dared face them. And now, humanity was going to take them head-on. Jason Bonner finished his final preparations on the computer systems. He was the only one who could navigate through the complex alien encryption to upload the virus. "We're ready," he said, closing the last terminal. "This is it. Once we leave, there's no turning back." Kale nodded, her face set with grim determination. "Let's make it count." With that, the team left the base, moving swiftly through the narrow corridors, past armed guards, and out into the waiting transport ships. As they flew through the atmosphere toward the Echo, the tension mounted. The ship's engines hummed beneath them, the sound a constant reminder of the gravity of their mission. But just as they were nearing the Echo, an unexpected alarm blared. A high-pitched scream echoed across the comms as a breach was detected. Xiran drones, likely sent to scout the area, had detected their transport. The Echo's cloaking device was powerful, but it wasn't perfect. They had been found out earlier than expected. The transport ship was jolted violently as the drones locked onto their location. Sparks flew from the control panel as Bonner fought to override the ship's systems and restore control. The ship's artificial intelligence screamed in protest as the drones began firing. "Brace for impact," Kale shouted, her voice calm but firm. The ship veered violently to the side as the first blast hit. Bonner's fingers danced across the console, trying to pull the ship out of its freefall. The lights flickered, and for a moment, everything was chaos. The team held on, securing themselves to their seats. But it was clear, the Xirans were closing in fast. The ship plunged through the atmosphere, and just as it seemed they might crash, Bonner's voice came through the comms, calm but strained. "I've got control, but we're not landing without a fight. Get ready." Kale's heart pounded in her chest as the team prepared for the fight of their lives. The Echo's surface was visible now, and despite the chaos, she couldn't help but feel a sense of hope. They were going to make it, no matter the cost. The transport crashed through the clouds, finally descending toward the hidden station. The countdown to launch their plan had begun. They were moments away from making history, but first they had to survive. And they had to outsmart an enemy that was far more advanced. They had no idea just how intense the fight would be, but one thing was certain: humanity's last stand had begun, and no matter what happened next, they would never surrender. The world above was in chaos, but deep beneath the Earth's surface, in the secret underground cities that had been built long ago, humanity's last hope was beginning to form. These cities, hidden away from the Xiran Empire's prying eyes, had been home to the few survivors who had managed to escape the initial wave of destruction. They were all that was left of Earth's once great military and scientific might. Now, they were the Resistance, a scattered group of soldiers, engineers, and scientists, working together to fight back. Inside one of these underground cities, a diverse group of humans gathered in the shadows of a command center. They came from all walks of life: veterans of past wars, former scientists who had studied alien technology, and engineers who had once designed some of the most advanced weapons on Earth. Together, they formed the core of the Resistance. The room was dimly lit, filled with the hum of computers and the smell of stale air. The walls were lined with old maps and makeshift technology, remnants of a world that had been lost. But here, in the heart of the underground city, they were preparing for their most dangerous mission yet. At the center of the room, Jason Bonner, the genius hacker who had cracked the Xiran AI code before, worked tirelessly. His hands flew across the holographic interface, navigating through the encrypted systems of the Xiran Empire. Sweat beaded on his forehead as he worked. The mission was clear: disrupt the Xiran AI systems that controlled their warships, cripple their fleets, and give humanity a fighting chance. The problem was, the virus he needed to design wasn't just any ordinary hack. It was a quantum-level attack, a highly sophisticated piece of code that would target the heart of the Xiran AI's thought process. If successful, it would bring their entire fleet to a halt, rendering their warships useless and forcing the Xirans into a desperate retreat. But there was a massive risk involved. If Bonner's virus failed, or worse, was detected, the entire Resistance could be wiped out in an instant. Bonner's fingers paused on the console as he looked up at Captain Sarah Kale, who had been watching him silently. Her face was set, unreadable. "How much longer?" she asked, her voice low but firm. "Almost there," Bonner replied, though the uncertainty in his tone was clear. But we need more time. The Zirans are already starting to scan for vulnerabilities. If we don't act soon, they'll be onto us. Kale nodded and turned to the rest of the room. We don't have the luxury of time. We need to move faster. The Ziran fleet is growing closer, and we can't afford to wait for them to hit us first. The room fell silent. Every member of the Resistance knew the stakes. Their survival depended on this mission, and if they failed, Earth would be lost forever. Kale addressed the team. We're going in. I want teams ready for insertion. We'll hit them hard and fast. The engineers and soldiers in the room sprang into action, preparing the necessary equipment. As they scrambled, the tension in the air grew. Every soldier knew the risks, but none of them hesitated. They had fought for their homes, their families, and now they would fight for Earth's future. Outside the command center, the streets of the underground city were buzzing with activity. Resistance groups were organizing, checking their weapons, and saying their goodbyes to their loved ones. There was no turning back now. Every soldier knew the risks, but they also knew that Earth's future depended on them. Meanwhile, Bonner continued his work, sweat dripping from his brow. His eyes darted between several holographic screens as he input the final lines of code. He was close, but the pressure was mounting. He glanced at the clock ticking down, knowing that in just minutes, the Zirans would launch a counterattack. The moment of truth was near. And then, it happened. The warning alarms blared through the underground city. The Ziran drones, equipped with deadly weapons, had found them. Thousands of them swarmed in the sky above, their sleek black ships descending at terrifying speeds. The drones were advanced, faster, and stronger than anything the Resistance had ever encountered, but they were not invincible. The first explosion hit the ground just outside the Resistance's base. The shockwave rattled the walls, and dust filled the air. The sound of missiles cutting through the sky filled the air as the Resistance team scrambled to deploy their defense systems, but there was no time to prepare. The attack had begun. Kale rallied her team. Get to your stations, now. We need to hold them off long enough for Bonner to finish his work. As Kale led her team out of the command center, they emerged into the chaos of the streets. The underground city, once a safe haven, was now a battleground. The Ziran drones hovered above, unleashing a relentless barrage of firepower. Buildings crumbled as the missiles struck, sending debris flying in every direction. The sound of explosions echoed through the air, creating a scene of utter destruction. It was a nightmare, but the humans fought back with everything they had. Soldiers returned fire, using every weapon at their disposal, while engineers scrambled to activate the city's defensive shields. Amid the chaos, Bonner's voice crackled through the comms. I'm in. The virus is uploading now. Give me a few seconds. The tension was unbearable as Kale and her team fought their way through the wreckage, dodging explosions and gunfire as they advanced. The Resistance soldiers were fighting tooth and nail, determined to buy Bonner the time he needed. They moved through the streets, firing at the drones, using every scrap of cover to protect themselves from the oncoming attacks. Above, the Ziran ships unleashed a devastating orbital bombardment, their missiles streaking through the sky. Buildings exploded in fiery eruptions, sending plumes of smoke and debris into the air. The ground shook with every blast, but the humans pushed forward, undeterred. The Resistance knew that this was their one chance to take down the Ziran Empire. As the battle raged on, Kale's team made it to their objective, a heavily fortified bunker that housed the Resistance's main defense systems. There, they set up a defensive perimeter, ready to face the next wave of Ziran drones. They knew that the enemy would keep coming, but they also knew that their mission was almost complete. Bonner's virus was on the verge of being deployed, and if they could hold out just a little longer, they might have a shot at victory. With every second that passed, the tension grew. The sounds of battle filled the air, explosions, gunfire, and the relentless hum of the drones overhead. But despite the overwhelming odds, the humans fought back with everything they had. They fought for Earth, for their families, and for the future of humanity. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Bonner's voice came through the comms once more. "It's done. The virus is in. We've disabled their fleet. Now, let's finish this." The moment those words hit the airwaves, a wave of relief washed over the resistance. But the fight was far from over. The Ziran drones were still out there, and they would stop at nothing to destroy humanity's last hope. But now, with the virus in place, the humans had the upper hand. The battle was turning in their favor, but the war was far from over, and they were ready to face whatever came next. The first major attack by the Ziran Empire on Earth was more devastating than anyone could have imagined. After the disruption of their AI systems, the Zirans had regrouped and launched a full-scale invasion with the aim of wiping out every last human. The ground shook as the massive alien warships entered Earth's atmosphere, blocking out the sky and casting a shadow over the cities below. The once vibrant planet was now under the dark veil of the Ziran fleet. But humanity wasn't going down without a fight. The underground resistance, despite being outnumbered and outgunned, had a plan. They had developed cloaking devices and stealth technology, tools that would give them a fighting chance against the Zirans' overwhelming firepower. The Resistance's fighters moved in the shadows, hidden from enemy radar, launching surprise attacks on the alien fleet, hoping to create enough chaos to disrupt their plans. The Resistance knew that their survival depended on striking at the right moments, using guerrilla tactics to wear down the Ziran forces. They knew that they had limited resources, no more advanced weapons, no heavy artillery. But what they had was sheer willpower and the determination to survive. They would not go quietly into the night. Jason Bonner, the brilliant hacker whose mind had been the key to sabotaging the Ziran fleet, was deep in the heart of the battle. His mission was to keep the fleet disoriented, while the humans hit back with everything they had. However, despite his genius, he couldn't escape the emotional toll the war had taken on him. During one of the missions, his best friend, a soldier named Mark Jensen, had fallen during a fierce firefight. Jensen was everything Bonner had been fighting for, his loyal friend, his brother in arms. Losing him was a crushing blow, one that tore at Bonner's heart. The death of his friend left a gaping hole in Bonner's chest. Every moment of this war had been personal for him, but now, it was more than just a battle for survival. It was a fight for redemption. Bonner had promised Jensen that they would win this war together. Now he had to fulfill that promise, no matter the cost. As Bonner processed his grief, he knew there was no time for mourning. The Zirans were closing in, and the Resistance had to act fast. The attack was relentless. Ziran drones filled the sky, firing lasers that cut through the buildings and streets of what was left of the human cities. The Resistance soldiers, hidden in the shadows, fought back with everything they had. Cloaking devices activated, they moved quickly, taking out key targets, striking in stealth before disappearing again into the smoke and rubble. Jason, despite his heartache, remained focused. He continued to use his hacking skills, sending out counterattacks to disrupt the Ziran systems. But this time, it wasn't just about the mission. Every strike, every enemy downed was for Jensen. He couldn't let his friend's death be in vain. In the midst of the chaos, the Resistance encountered a new weapon, an eye-controlled drone swarm that was faster and deadlier than anything they had fought before. These drones were designed to seek and destroy, relentlessly pursuing their targets. Their advanced weaponry tore through the Resistance's defenses, and human casualties mounted quickly. But the humans weren't ready to give up yet. They used every advantage they had, from the cloaking devices to the terrain, taking the battle to the heart of the city. The Resistance's soldiers were well-trained, but facing eye-controlled robots and drones in close-quarters combat was nothing like the warfare they had known before. The drones moved with terrifying precision, but the Resistance fighters adapted quickly. They fought with everything from knives to improvised explosives, charging at the robotic enemies in brutal hand-to-hand combat, using the environment to their advantage. The battle scenes were intense and filled with action. The city streets became a war zone, with explosions tearing through the pavement, drones crashing into buildings, and laser beams lighting up the sky. The sounds of gunfire echoed through the streets, blending with the high-pitched whine of the drones' weapons. It was a scene of destruction and desperation, with the resistance fighting tooth and nail against a foe that seemed impossible to defeat. Bonner, in the thick of it all, hacked into the drone systems, briefly taking control of a few to turn them against their masters. But the momentary victories came at a heavy cost. For every drone the humans destroyed, 2 more took its place. The Ziran Empire seemed unstoppable, and the human forces were running low on supplies. As the battle raged on, the resistance began to question whether they could really win. Was this the end for humanity? They had faced losses, too many to count, but they couldn't stop now. If they failed, if they allowed the Ziran Empire to win, Earth would be lost forever. The stakes couldn't be higher. The enemy seemed to be everywhere. Bonner fought to keep the virus running, making sure it spread through the Ziran systems, hoping to cause enough confusion to slow them down. But it was becoming more and more difficult to maintain the attack. He couldn't do it alone. He needed his comrades to survive long enough for the virus to take full effect. Then, as if fate itself had decided to show its cruel face, the Zirans unleashed their most devastating weapon yet, a fleet of heavily armed, AI-controlled war machines that descended upon the last human stronghold. The Resistance's cloaking devices had worked to keep them hidden, but now the enemy knew their location. They had tracked them down, and the final battle for survival had begun. The Resistance soldiers held their ground, fighting fiercely as the massive war machines advanced. But even they knew that this might be the end. The war machines were nearly indestructible, with shields that absorbed every shot fired at them. The humans were outmatched in every way. The odds of survival were slim, but they fought on, determined to protect what little they had left. Bonner, overwhelmed by the grief and the overwhelming forces attacking, finally broke through the Ziran fleet's last defenses. With one final push, the virus was uploaded into the core systems of the Ziran Empire, sending a shockwave through their entire network. The war machines faltered for a moment, their control systems malfunctioning, giving the humans a brief chance to strike back. The Resistance fighters didn't hesitate. With one final, desperate charge, they launched everything they had at the Ziran fleet. The battle reached its peak intensity as drones and war machines exploded in fiery bursts. The humans fought with everything they had left. This was their last stand, and they weren't going to let the Ziran Empire win without giving it everything they had. It was a battle for survival, but it wasn't over yet. The humans still had a chance. The question now was whether they could hold on long enough to see the end of the war, and whether Earth would survive. The moment of truth had arrived. The Ziran Empire's flagship, the heart of their war machine, loomed over Earth's defenses, casting an ominous shadow on the battlefield. This ship was more than just a weapon. It was the symbol of the Ziran Empire's superiority, the pinnacle of their AI-driven technology. And if it wasn't destroyed, humanity had no hope of survival. Captain Sarah Kell's team had spent weeks preparing for this mission. They had been hiding in the shadows, using cloaking devices and stealth tactics to avoid detection by the enemy. But now, there was no more hiding. This was the final offensive, the last chance to strike back. The Resistance had no more time to wait. If they failed now, Earth would fall, and humanity would be wiped from the stars. Jason Bonner, the genius hacker who had been at the heart of humanity's efforts from the beginning, stood in front of his team, his eyes steely with determination. This wasn't just about taking down the Ziran flagship. It was personal. Bonner knew that every move he made, every line of code he deployed, could either save humanity or doom them. The team had gathered for one last strategy session, huddled together in the command center of their cloaked space station. The tension was thick in the air. Each of them knew what was at stake, but the quiet whispers of fear were drowned out by their shared resolve. They had come this far. There was no turning back. Captain Kell was calm, but even she could feel the weight of the moment. She turned to Bonner, who had been working tirelessly on his plan to take down the Ziran Empire's AI systems once and for all. "Jason, are you ready?" she asked, her voice steady, but carrying an edge of uncertainty. She had seen him at his best, but this mission was beyond anything they had attempted before. Bonner nodded, his fingers trembling slightly. "I've deployed the virus," he said. "Once we hit the flagship with it, their entire system will collapse. The AI will be crippled, and the fleet will lose its coordination. But we have to time it perfectly. The Zirans can't know we're coming." The plan was risky. They would have to navigate past a wall of Ziran drones, AI-controlled sentries, and defensive shields, all while staying cloaked to avoid detection. The Zirans had upgraded their defenses since the last attack, and it would be no easy feat to get close enough to launch the virus. But there was no other choice. The war could not go on forever. As the team prepared for the assault, the final pieces of their strategy clicked into place. Bonner sat at his station, fingers flying over the keyboard as he fine-tuned the virus. The AI had been their greatest threat, but now it was about to become their greatest weakness. Meanwhile, Captain Kale briefed her team on the mission ahead. "We're going in fast and hard. Stay close, stay quiet. Our first priority is disabling their shields. Once that's done, we'll have an opening to hit the flagship directly. Remember, this could be our only shot. We don't get a second chance." The team moved into position. They had a small fleet of human fighters at their disposal, but they were no match for the massive Ziran warships in terms of firepower. What they had, however, was speed, stealth, and the element of surprise. Their cloaking devices kept them invisible, their movements precise and deliberate. As the battle began, the tension escalated. The space around them was a vast, endless void, but the flashes of weapons fire and the streaks of missiles lighting up the darkness created a visual spectacle that was both breathtaking and terrifying. Human fighters darted in and out of the chaos, narrowly avoiding enemy fire while launching their own attacks on the drones and defensive platforms. Jason's virus was taking effect, but it wasn't without its challenges. As he watched the progress of the virus spread through the Ziran fleet's systems, he felt the pressure mounting. His screen flickered for a moment, and he cursed under his breath. One of the core servers was resisting the virus. Too much encryption, too many layers of protection. "Bonner, what's going on?" Captain Kell's voice crackled through the comms. "I'm working on it," Bonner replied, his voice tense. "The flagship's AI is more advanced than I thought, but I can get through." His team continued their assault on the drones, engaging in dogfights with the Ziran forces. The human fighters zipped and weaved through the battlefield, firing missiles, lasers, and energy blasts, but the Zirans were relentless. Each human ship took damage, but they pushed forward, determined to keep the pressure on. It was then that the true scale of the battle became apparent. The Ziran Empire was sending wave after wave of drones, massive machines with glowing red eyes and weapons capable of destroying entire ships in seconds. They were everywhere, circling around the human fighters, blocking their paths, and firing with deadly accuracy. The space between the two sides was filled with the explosive sounds of missiles, gunfire, and the occasional crash of a drone being torn apart by human weapons. Despite the overwhelming odds, the humans pressed on, each fighter putting their life on the line to ensure that the mission would succeed. Captain Kale led from the front, guiding her team through the chaos with calm precision. She knew that if they didn't succeed, all of humanity would fall. Her heart raced, but her mind was focused on the task at hand. Back on the ground, a human scientist named Dr. Lucas Hayward, who had been instrumental in designing the virus that was now crippling the Ziran AI systems, made a decision that would change everything. He knew that in order for the virus to fully take effect, they needed to disable the Ziran mothership's core reactor. But getting close enough to destroy it meant certain death. Dr. Hayward had no hesitation. "Captain," he said, his voice steady despite the risk, "I can do it. I can disable their reactor. but I'll need to be on the front lines." Kale hesitated for a moment, but she knew there was no time for second-guessing. "Do it. You're our only hope." With a final emotional look at his team, Dr. Hayward suited up and made his way toward the heart of the battlefield. He knew this was a one-way mission, but he was willing to give everything to save humanity. In a final act of bravery, Dr. Hayward infiltrated the Zuran mothership's core and activated the failsafe, sending a wave of electromagnetic pulses that disabled the ship's main reactor. The entire vessel shook as its power systems went dark. The rest of the fleet followed suit, their AI systems shutting down one by one. The Zurans were blind, helpless without their technology. The tide of the battle had turned. But the victory was bittersweet. As the flagship began to break apart, the human fighters cheered, knowing they had achieved the impossible. But they had paid a heavy price. Dr. Hayward's sacrifice had not been in vain, but it was one that would haunt them for the rest of their lives. Jason Bonner, who had been the mastermind behind the virus, felt the weight of the sacrifice deeply. The battle was far from over, but the turning point had come. The Zuran Empire was now vulnerable. They had lost their AI superiority. But as Jason looked out into the stars, he knew that there was still much to be done. The road ahead would be long, and the cost would continue to rise. The fight for Earth had entered a new phase, and humanity had taken its first real step toward victory. The battle had reached its most critical point. Humanity's last hope rested on the shoulders of those fighting in the void of space, their resolve stronger than the iron weapons they wielded. The Zuran Empire had nearly crushed them, but now, humanity was ready to fight back with everything they had. The time had come for the final assault. The final weapon, the Echo, was humanity's ultimate trump card, a powerful AI-driven device capable of generating a black hole strong enough to annihilate an entire fleet, had been hidden deep within Earth's underground resistance. It was their last chance. If it worked, the Zuran Empire would be wiped out. If it failed, Earth would fall, and humanity would be nothing more than a fleeting memory in the stars. Jason Bonner stood at the command center, overseeing the deployment of the Echo. His mind raced, calculating every possible outcome as he linked his AI-driven battle system to the device. The data poured in, and he saw the enormous potential of the weapon, but he also knew its dangers. A black hole of that size could tear apart everything within its radius, including those who were close to it. He had no choice but to trust the calculations. If humanity didn't take this risk, there would be no future for them. His body, battered and bruised from the earlier battles, screamed in pain as he navigated the controls. Jason's injuries were severe, but he had no time to care. His heart pounded, adrenaline coursing through his veins. His fingers flew over the holographic screens, activating the Echo with precision. But just as he did, a series of alarms blared. "The Echo is online," he muttered, his voice a mixture of relief and dread. "But we have to get close enough to deploy it. The Zurans won't let us anywhere near them." Captain Sarah Kell's voice came through the comms, steady and confident. "We're ready. We'll cover your approach." Jason knew this was it. This was the moment that would decide the fate of humanity. The humans, though outnumbered and outgunned, had something the Zurans could never understand: a will to fight. They had fought for their families, for their home, and for their future. The final wave of human fighters, cloaked and maneuvering through the debris of the previous battle, locked their weapons into place, preparing for one last push. There was no turning back now. As Jason linked up with his team, he saw the Zuran fleet position itself in front of Earth, a wall of ships and drones that seemed insurmountable. The alien forces, now fully aware of humanity's weapon, began launching counterattacks, sending a barrage of missiles toward the approaching human fighters. The final assault was about to begin. The space between the two forces became a war zone, with missiles, laser fire, and explosions lighting up the dark void. The human ships, though small compared to the mighty Zuran vessels, darted in and out of the battle with precision. Each ship was like a ghost in the night, its cloaking technology allowing it to survive against overwhelming odds. But even the best tech couldn't guarantee survival. One by one, human ships fell, their debris scattered across the vast expanse of space. Jason Bonner fought alongside them, controlling his eye-driven battle system with precision. His fingers were slick with sweat as he activated each system, guiding his ship through the onslaught. But the pain in his body was becoming unbearable. His side throbbed where he had been injured in the earlier fight, and he could feel the blood soaking his clothes. He was losing strength, but his mind was sharp. He had to finish this. The Zirans, sensing victory, launched their final assault. Their flagship, the massive warship that had been the center of their power, fired its main weapon at the human forces. The blast sent shockwaves through space, shaking the very fabric of reality. But the humans were ready. The final wave of fighters had locked onto the Ziran flagship, preparing to strike. Amidst the chaos, Captain Cale's voice crackled over the comms. "Jason, we've made it into position. We're ready to make the final push." Jason took a deep breath, his fingers moving despite the exhaustion and the pain. The black hole generator, the Echo, was now the only thing standing between humanity's future and annihilation. But to deploy it, they had to get closer to the flagship. The resistance fighters had to hold off the enemy long enough for Jason to get close enough to fire. Deploying in 3, 2, 1. Jason activated the Echo. The device hummed to life, its power systems kicking in as it began to draw in the space around it. A small, unstable singularity was forming, a black hole that would grow larger and stronger as it consumed the surrounding matter. But there was no turning back now. The moment the device was deployed, there was no guarantee that they would survive. The visuals were nothing short of apocalyptic. Space itself seemed to bend as the black hole formed, pulling everything around it into its grasp. The human fighters, now completely exposed, engaged in a last-ditch effort to protect Jason and the device. The Zirans, desperate to stop the inevitable, fired everything they had, sending waves of missiles and energy blasts toward the human ships. But the humans fought with everything they had, pushing forward despite the odds. In the chaos of the battle, a massive explosion lit up the sky as one of the Ziran drones collided with the atmosphere. The resulting shockwave sent debris flying in all directions, and a bright flash of light blinded everyone for a moment. The human fighters weaved through the debris, narrowly avoiding destruction as they continued to engage the enemy. Jason's eye-controlled battle system assisted in the battle, guiding his every move, but he could feel his body growing weaker with each passing second. His vision blurred, and he struggled to keep his focus. But then, something inside him snapped. He couldn't afford to fall now, not when everything depended on him. He gritted his teeth, pushing through the pain and fatigue, guiding the Echo toward the heart of the battle. The final moment arrived. Jason gave the signal to deploy the full power of the Echo. With one last, desperate effort, the black hole activated, sending a wave of energy across the battlefield. The Ziran fleet, already struggling against the human forces, was caught in the device's pull. Ships that had once seemed indestructible were torn apart in seconds, sucked into the black hole's abyss. The visual spectacle was overwhelming. Ships, drones, and debris being pulled toward the singularity, their destruction as swift as it was inevitable. The once proud Ziran mothership, the symbol of their empire, was consumed by the event horizon, its massive hull disappearing into the void. But the victory came at a cost. The shockwaves from the Echo's explosion spread outward, sending a blast of energy that knocked out the remaining human fighters. Jason Bonner, bloodied and battered, watched as the device's power surged, feeling the force of the blast rattle through his ship. And then, everything went silent. For a moment, it seemed like all hope had been lost. But then, the stars began to reappear, and the distant, haunting glow of the black hole began to fade. The Ziran Empire had been destroyed. Humanity had won. The surviving humans slowly regrouped, their ships battered but still operational. They had fought to the last breath, and they had triumphed. But the victory was bittersweet. So many had given their lives to make this possible. Jason Bonner, though alive, had lost so much: his friends, his allies, and a part of himself that could never be reclaimed. As the humans looked out over the wreckage of the battle, they knew that their fight was far from over. The Ziran Empire was gone, but the universe was vast, and there were always new threats on the horizon. But for now, humanity had survived. And that was something worth fighting for. The war had ended, but humanity's journey was only just beginning. The silence after the battle was deafening. The once chaotic battlefield, filled with the screams of warfare, now lay still in the cold expanse of space. The stars twinkled as though nothing had happened, indifferent to the violence that had just erupted. The last remnants of the Ziran Empire were nothing more than debris, scattered across the void. Humanity had won, but the cost had been high. Jason Bonner was dead. The leader, the fighter, the symbol of humanity's defiance against the seemingly unstoppable Ziran Empire. He was gone. But his sacrifice, his final act of deploying the Echo, had ensured victory for the human race. As the black hole generator exploded, swallowing the alien fleet, he had become part of the very void he had helped create. The war was over, but the price of freedom had been steep. The survivors gathered in the remains of their ships, the ones still intact, their hulls scarred and battered from the last desperate push. Captain Sarah Cale stood alone at the helm of her vessel, staring out into the distance where the remnants of the Ziran fleet drifted. Her hands gripped the controls tightly, her knuckles white. The tears she had fought so hard to hold back were finally free, tracing down her face like the stars beyond her window. She had lost so many friends, allies, soldiers who had given their lives for this very moment, but none of it felt like enough. None of it felt like a true victory when the man who had led them, who had given them hope, was gone. "Captain," a voice broke through the haze of her grief. Lieutenant Marlowe stood in the doorway, his face grim but filled with respect. He had been with her through the thick of the fighting, and though he had survived, he had witnessed the same horrors she had. She wiped away the tears, but her eyes remained distant. "He's gone, Marlowe," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Bonner was our heart. Without him, what are we?" Marlowe stepped forward, placing a hand on her shoulder. "We're still here, Captain. We're still here because of him. He may be gone, but his spirit is in all of us now. We fight for him. We rebuild because he believed in us." Cale nodded, though the pain in her heart refused to fade. The emptiness of losing Jason was something that could never be filled. But she knew Marlowe was right. They had survived. And that survival was a testament to the strength they had found in each other, and in the memory of those who had fallen. Outside, the survivors began to regroup, gathering on the remaining ships that still had the power to move. Their faces were weary, their bodies battered, but there was a glimmer of hope in their eyes. They had lost comrades, friends, and loved ones, but they had won. They had fought the invaders, the ones who sought to enslave and destroy them. And they had won. The final step of the battle had been brutal. As the Echo's explosion rippled through space, the last of the Ziran ships had been sucked into the black hole it created. The warships, once so menacing and mighty, had been reduced to nothing in an instant. The Ziran Empire was no more. But that final act of destruction came with its own cost. The device that had turned the tide of the war had also obliterated the remaining human ships that had been in its path. The survivors now faced an uncertain future. The human fleet was in tatters, its numbers severely diminished. But there was no turning back. They had to rebuild, to honor the sacrifice of those who had given everything for this moment. There would be no time for mourning. Not yet. There was too much work to do, too much at stake. As the humans made their way back to Earth, now free from the Ziran threat, they began the long process of recovery. The planet was scared, its cities damaged, its people broken. But beneath that surface, there was a spark of hope. Humanity had survived the darkest of times, and now it was time to rise from the ashes. The echoes of the final battle still haunted their dreams, but the survivors were determined to build a new world, a world free from the fear of alien oppression. They would not let the sacrifices of those who had fought and died be in vain. They would create a future that honored their bravery. Captain Kale stood on the deck of her ship, looking down at the Earth below. It was no longer the Earth she had known. The scars of war were visible from space, but she could see the beginnings of recovery. The green of the forests, the blue of the oceans, it was all still there, waiting to be restored. I wish Jason could see this, Kale whispered to herself. She could almost hear his voice, urging her forward, telling her to never give up. He had always believed in humanity's potential, and now his belief would carry them forward. The survivors began to return to the surface of Earth, where the true work of rebuilding began. Governments were reformed, cities were rebuilt, and the people began to pick up the pieces of their shattered lives. There was no denying the hardship that lay ahead, but there was also a sense of unity, a sense of determination that they had not had before. The war had changed them. It had made them stronger. But it had also shown them how fragile their existence truly was. The threat of the Ziran Empire was gone, but in its place, there would be new challenges, new threats. The universe was vast, and humanity was no longer alone in it. The war had proved that. There were other species out there, some of them friendlier than the Zirans, others perhaps even more dangerous. But humanity had learned a valuable lesson from this war. They would never be underestimated again. The Zirans had thought they could crush them, erase them from the stars. But the human spirit had proven stronger. The fight for survival had forged a new generation of warriors, scientists, and dreamers who were ready to face whatever came next. As the survivors stood together, looking out at the horizon, there was a shared understanding. They had won the battle, but the war was far from over. Humanity's place in the universe had been secured, but it was up to them to ensure that they never lost it again. "We're not done yet," Kale said, her voice filled with resolve. "We fight for the future. We rebuild, and we prepare. We're not just survivors. We're builders. And the world we create will be ours." The final message was clear. Humanity was never to be underestimated. Their resilience, their defiance, had saved them. They had faced extinction, but instead of giving in, they had chosen to fight. And as long as they had the will to fight, there would always be a future. A new era had dawned, and it would be their era.